Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're all about making you smarter, quicker, by diving deep into the wisdom tucked away in books. Today, we're tackling Thinking Fast and Slow. It's by Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, a classic.
It's a game changer for how we understand decision-making. And we've got you covered with some awesome study notes and a link to the audiobook right in the description.
That's great because
But life's busy, so we're serving up brain power on the go.
I like that tagline.
Hit that like button and share this with a friend who could use a boost.
Yeah.
Trust me, you'll both thank me later. Okay, let's unpack Thinking Fast and Slow. What's the core concept here?
Well, Kahneman brilliantly breaks down how our brains rely on two distinct systems of thought.
Okay.
System one is the fast, instinctive one. Think gut reactions and snap judgments.
Okay.
It's what helps us navigate everyday life without overthinking every little thing.
Right.
Then there's system two, the slower, more deliberate system.
Okay.
This is where logic, analysis, and critical thinking come into play. Kahneman argues that we over-rely on system one, and that's where we get tripped up and make those less-than-stellar decisions.
So it's like having a super speedy but sometimes clumsy autopilot and a more thoughtful but slower manual mode in our heads.
That's a great analogy. System one is incredibly efficient,
Right.
but it relies heavily on heuristics, mental shortcuts that let us make quick judgments based on patterns and experiences.
Okay.
These shortcuts are great for conserving mental energy,
Right.
but can lead to biases and flawed thinking.
Okay, so system one is like that friend who's always ready with a quick answer, but it's not always the most accurate.
Yeah.
And system two is the friend who takes their time, researches everything,
Yes,
but maybe takes a bit too long to get to the point.
precisely. And the challenge is finding the right balance between the two.
Right.
We need system one for its speed and efficiency,
Right.
but we also need to engage system two when the stakes are high or when we need to make more careful judgments.
Can you give an example of how these heuristics lead us astray?
Imagine you're scrolling through social media and you see a post about someone winning the lottery.
Okay.
Suddenly, it feels like everyone's winning the lottery, and you start to overestimate your own chances.
Oh, yeah.
That's the availability heuristic at work.
Got it.
We tend to overestimate the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind.
Oh, I've totally been there. It's like when you see a news story about a plane crash and suddenly you're terrified of flying, even though it's statistically much safer than driving.
Right.
Our brains are so easily swayed by vivid examples.
Exactly. And that's just one of many cognitive biases that Kahneman describes.
Oh, wow.
Another fascinating one is the anchoring bias, where the first piece of information we encounter about something disproportionately influences our judgment.
So if the first price I see for a new gadget is sky high, anything lower will seem like a steal, even if it's still overpriced.
Exactly. That initial anchor sets the frame for how we evaluate everything that follows. Smart marketers use this to their advantage all the time.
Yeah, tricky. Okay, this is already making me rethink how I process information. So how do we start tapping into system two more effectively? What are some strategies for becoming more aware of these biases?
One of the most powerful tools is simply to slow down.
Slow down.
Pause before making a decision, especially an important one.
Okay.
And ask yourself, is this my gut reaction speaking, or have I really thought this through?
That's great advice.
Yeah.
But easier said than done in our fast-paced world, right?
Yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with information and pressured to make quick decisions.
It definitely takes conscious effort,
Yeah.
but it's worth it. Another helpful strategy is to cultivate intellectual humility.
Intellectual humility.
Recognize that we all have blind spots and that our initial judgments aren't always accurate.
So it's about being open to different perspectives and being willing to question our own assumptions.
Precisely. And that leads to another powerful concept Kahneman explores.
Okay.
Loss aversion.
Loss aversion.
This is the idea that the pain of a loss is felt more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It explains why people hold on to losing investments longer than they should or stay in unsatisfying jobs because they're afraid of the unknown. We're wired to avoid those losses, even if it means missing out on potential gains.
Exactly. Loss aversion can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And it can lead us to make decisions that are not in our best interest.
Right.
But understanding this bias is the first step to overcoming it.
This is blowing my mind wide open. I'm already starting to see the world in a whole new light. What if we pose this question to our listeners? Think of a time when you were faced with a difficult decision.
Okay.
Looking back, do you think loss aversion played a role in your choice? Share your stories in the comments. We'd love to hear your insights.
I'm looking forward to hearing how they apply this concept to their own lives. Welcome back to our deep dive into thinking fast and slow. We're unraveling the mysteries of the human mind and discovering how to make better decisions one cognitive bias at a time.
And we've only just scratched the surface. Last time we explored those sneaky mental shortcuts. Our brains take the heuristics that can lead to both brilliant insights and some pretty spectacular blunders.
Exactly. And building on that, one of the most powerful concepts Kahneman introduces is the framing effect.
Framing effect. That sounds like something out of a psychology textbook. Break it down for us.
It's simpler than it sounds. The framing effect describes how the way information is presented or framed can drastically alter our choices, even if the underlying facts remain the same.
So it's not just what we're told, but how we're told it. That's fascinating.
Absolutely. Our brains are wired to respond differently to positive and negative framing, even if the outcomes are logically equivalent.
Can you give us a real-world example of how this plays out?
Imagine a scenario where doctors are presenting a patient with two treatment options for a serious illness. Option A is framed positively. This treatment has a 70% survival rate. Option B presents the same information but framed negatively. This treatment has a 30% mortality rate.
Logically, both options convey the same information.
Yeah, precisely. But studies show that people are far more likely to choose option, the positively framed treatment, even though both options have the same statistical outcome.
Wow, that's incredible. It really highlights the power of language and how easily our perceptions can be manipulated.
Exactly. And this framing effect is everywhere. You see it in marketing, advertising, politics, even everyday conversations.
Okay, so how do we arm ourselves against this sneaky framing effect? How can we see through the spin and make more objective decisions?
The first step is awareness. Recognize that the framing effect exists and be wary of how information is being presented. Try to reframe the information in a neutral way and ask yourself, what are the underlying facts regardless of the positive or negative spin?
So it's like taking a mental step back and stripping away the emotional charge to get to the core of the matter.
Exactly. It's about consciously engaging system 2, that slower, more analytical part of our brains. Another tip is to consider the source of the information. Are they trying to persuade you, sell you something, or manipulate your emotions?
That's great advice. It's like becoming a detective for information, always questioning motives and looking for the hidden agenda.
Exactly. Being a critical consumer of information is essential for making sound decisions in a world overflowing with persuasive messages.
All right, so we've got anchoring bias, availability bias, framing effect. It feels like our brains are a minefield of these cognitive traps. Any other major players we need to watch out for?
There are many, but one Kahneman highlights as particularly pervasive is the sunk cost fallacy.
Sunk cost fallacy. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's that all about?
It's the tendency to continue investing in something, time, money, effort, even when it's clearly not working out. We get so attached to our past investments that we're reluctant to cut our losses and move on.
Oh, I think we've all been there. Like when you keep watching a terrible movie just because you've already invested an hour of your time, or you finish a meal you don't like just because you paid for it.
Exactly. Those are everyday examples, but the sunk cost fallacy can have much bigger consequences. Think about staying in a dead-end job because you've already spent years building your career there, or clinging to a failing relationship because you've invested so much time and emotion.
Ouch. Those hit close to home. It's like our past investments hold us hostage, preventing us from making rational decisions in the present.
That's a great way to put it. We become emotionally attached to our past choices, and that can cloud our judgment when it comes to making decisions about the future.
So how do we break free from this sunk cost trap? It sounds like it takes a lot of willpower.
It's not easy, but it's possible. The key is to shift our mindset. Instead of dwelling on what we've already lost, we need to ask ourselves, what's the best decision moving forward regardless of my past investments?
So it's about focusing on the future, not the past. It sounds like we need to be more ruthless with ourselves.
In a way, yes. It takes practice and a willingness to challenge our emotional attachments. But the payoff can be huge. Freeing ourselves from the sunk cost fallacy allows us to make more rational and fulfilling choices.
This is some serious food for thought.
Yeah.
I'm already thinking about areas in my own life where the sunk cost fallacy might be holding me back. What do you think, listeners? Have you ever fallen victim to the sunk cost fallacy? Share your stories in the comments. We're all in this together.
I can't wait to read their insights and see how they apply this concept to their own lives.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast, and slow. And let me tell you, my brain is doing backflips after all these insights.
It's quite a journey, isn't it?
It really is.
Kahneman really throws down the gauntlet when it comes to understanding how we make decisions.
Oh, yeah.
And we've uncovered some real gems so far.
Oh, for sure.
Those two systems of thinking,
Right.
the biases that trip us up, and the power of framing.
We've been busting those mental myths left and right. But I have a feeling there's still more treasure buried in this book. What other insights can we unearth?
Well, Kahneman dedicates a significant portion of the book to something called prospect theory.
Oh.
It's his Nobel Prize-winning work, and it flips the script on traditional economic models of decision-making.
Okay, prospect theory sounds a bit intimidating, but I'm all ears. What's the big idea here?
Traditional economics assumes people are rational actors who make decisions based purely on maximizing expected value.
Okay.
But prospect theory says, hold on, it's not that simple.
Okay.
It recognizes that our decisions are deeply influenced by psychological factors,
Gosh.
like those biases we've been discussing.
Oh, so it's acknowledging that we're not these cold, calculating robots that economists like to imagine.
Right.
We're human, messy, and driven by emotions.
Exactly. Prospect theory takes into account how we actually respond to gains and losses.
Yeah.
And it reveals that our emotions can sometimes lead us to make choices that seem illogical from a purely economic standpoint.
Can you give us a real-world example of how this plays out?
Let's say you're presented with an investment opportunity.
Okay.
Traditional economic theory suggests you'd always choose the option with the highest expected return regardless of the risk.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But prospect theory says we're more likely to be swayed by the potential for losses,
Okay.
even if the potential gains are much larger.
So it's like that old saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Yes.
We're more motivated to protect what we have than to risk it for something bigger.
Precisely. We're wired to avoid those losses, and this can have a huge impact on our financial decisions, often making us overly conservative.
This prospect theory is really shifting my perspective. Any other key takeaways we should know about?
One crucial element is the idea of reference points.
Or if it's points.
Kahneman argues we don't evaluate outcomes in isolation,
Okay.
but in comparison to a reference point, which is often our current situation.
So it's all relative. Like how good something feels depends on where we're starting from.
Exactly. A gain feels much more significant if we're clawing our way back from a loss. And a loss feels more painful if we're used to being on top.
That explains why people are so hesitant to sell stocks that have dropped in value, even if it makes financial sense.
Yeah.
They're clinging to that reference point of what they originally paid.
Exactly.
And any loss feels unacceptable.
Prospect theory helps us understand why we sometimes make decisions that seem irrational at first glance. We're not just crunching numbers, we're factoring in our emotional responses and perceptions of gain and loss.
Okay, so this prospect theory is blowing my mind. But how do we actually put this knowledge into action? Does Kahneman offer any practical advice on applying these concepts?
Absolutely. One of the most valuable takeaways from thinking fast and slow is the importance of recognizing our own cognitive biases and actively working to mitigate their influence.
So it's all about becoming more self-aware.
Yes.
Catching ourselves
Yeah.
when those biases start to creep in.
Exactly. It's like installing a mental security system that alerts us when those mental shortcuts are about to lead us astray.
Right.
Once we understand how our minds work, we can make more conscious, deliberate choices.
Okay, I'm ready to upgrade my mental security system. What are some actionable strategies we can use?
One simple but powerful technique is to slow down our decision-making process.
Yeah.
When we pause and reflect,
Yeah.
we're more likely to engage system 2,
Yeah.
the thoughtful, analytical part of our brains.
It's like hitting the brakes before we make an impulsive decision.
Precisely. Another helpful approach is to actively seek out diverse perspectives.
Okay.
Talk to people who have different viewpoints,
Right.
gather information from various sources, and challenge your own assumptions.
It's like getting a second opinion, but for our own thinking. I love it.
And finally, embrace a growth mindset.
Okay.
Be willing to experiment and learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
We all make less than perfect decisions sometimes. The
Yeah.
key is to view those missteps as learning opportunities and use them to refine our decision-making process.
This has been an absolutely incredible deep dive. We've only just scratched the surface of this groundbreaking book, but I feel like I've gained a whole new toolkit for understanding myself and making better decisions. What a journey.
I couldn't agree more. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And a huge thank you to our amazing listeners for joining us on this intellectual adventure. We hope you found this deep dive insightful and empowering.
Remember, the journey of understanding our minds and making better decisions is ongoing.
Yes.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those mental gears turning.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for links to the audiobook and our super helpful study notes. Until next time, happy thinking.